All right, can everybody hear me? I'm gonna make sure everything is good to go and working here. I'm gonna get everything pulled up on the Facebook feed over here so I can see the comments. Interesting, looks like I've got the snow icon back behind what will be end up a severe weather presentation, so you can kind of ignore the blowing and drifting of the snow there, but nothing cold in this weather presentation for today. All right, still getting the feed pulled up over here. Okay, sounds good. Let me know. We've got about a minute or so. Where are you calling, or where are you calling from? Where are you at? Where are you logging in here from? Northwest Ohio, Lucas County, Toledo, somewhere outside of the state? Let me know. Hope Barn asking already, how wide can hail get? We're actually going to talk about that right off the top. We're going to show some videos, some really big hailstones, but typically it doesn't happen here. Swanton, Ohio, Eden from Delphus, good morning. Fremont, Port Clinton, Toledo, Williams County, good. Point Place. How can I become a weather spotter, John is asking. Typically, the National Weather Service has severe weather presentations that they give, and that's a good start. But unfortunately, with this virus, they've canceled those. But next spring, hopefully, they'll have them. Findlay, Wyandotte County. Is hail related to snow? Actually, it is. We'll talk about how hail develops, and it does have a lot to do with snow, just not at the ground. Northeast Ohio, okay, good. Oregon, Perrysburg, Maumee School District, Fulton County. All right, sounds good. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. Of course, this is Getting Schooled. This is lesson number 2 here for us. So yesterday we talked all about tornadoes, and if you still have questions towards the end, we're going to leave a lot of time open for that. So if you still have some tornado questions, you were thinking about it yesterday, and you want to get that answered, that's no problem. We'll get right to it. But today we'll talk all about hail and wind, and tomorrow we're going to talk more about lightning and severe weather safety. We definitely don't want to leave that out. But all of these topics are very interesting. Today is Wednesday. Typically on Wednesday during Severe Weather Awareness Week, we would have the tornado sirens about this time that would get tested and would go off. That will not be the case this year because of the virus. Everything, as you know, is shut down. We're all in our homes and doing things a little bit differently. So they'll be testing those out at a different time. But we still did want to talk about severe weather awareness and talk about severe weather as we go throughout this week in some of these lessons. So today we'll talk about, I'm going to start off with a video. So we've got a storm chaser here back behind me. I'm going to go over here and play the video. There's not going to be any audio, but I'll kind of point out what's going on with it. And it's a couple minutes worth. And I already got some questions. How big can hail get? Well, take a look at this video. Bigger than probably any of us, including myself, has actually ever witnessed in person. So this is a group of storm chasers, and this has been several years ago. But in the top corner of the screen, they are out chasing tornadoes, or they're trying to, actually doing some research, and they're kind of on the outer edge of the storm. Now look at that hailstone that he's picked up. That is a baseball-sized chunk of hail that just came out of the sky, and they're looking up at the sky for more. I think at this point I would be getting in my car or getting to a safer spot. But yeah, they're trying to look up into the sky and look and find more. There's more hailstones coming out, so they're getting inside their car. But look at the size of some of those hailstones. And there's a reason why they can get that big and why they usually don't happen here in this part of the country. Usually there's farther out west. And so now they're driving down the road, getting to another spot. They're trying to, yesterday we were kind of showing the different parts of the storm and where some parts of the storm it can have a tornado, other parts have wind and hail. And they're trying to just get outside of that. But pretty impressive, big size hail. And they're coming up. Look at that one. Look at that. That's a size of about like a grapefruit or a softball. Not even a baseball, but a softball. So it's really large stuff. And that could hurt. These hailstones can come down out of the sky at 100 miles per hour. I don't think I would want to be hit with one of those, but I think he's out there trying to track some of them down here in that video and then collecting some of them. So they're pretty excited to see that. Now look at the windshield here. It's been hit and totally cracked. They're going to have to get a whole new windshield out of this altogether. So look at the size of that one's about the size of a grapefruit or a softball also, which is pretty impressive stuff. So even though these storm chasers were out there, they were looking at for tornado development. They're actually tornado researchers. They were out there trying to understand and learn more about them. But look at the windshield there. Totally just destroyed the whole thing. Pretty impressive stuff. All right, so we'll talk about how we can even get hailstones this size to form. And we'll start off by that. So here's another picture right here. You can see the hailstone. You can see the damage it did to that car. This one, it punctured holes all the way through it. All those holes are from different big hailstones that took place. So it could have a lot of power, do a lot of damage. That's what hail does. A lot of times it just really does a lot of damage and tears things up. So just like we talked yesterday about, we need different ingredients for tornadoes to form. We got to have, just like we're going to make those chocolate chip cookies, we got to have all the right ingredients come together at the right time. It's like that for hail too. We have to have, it's got to be cold somewhere for these hailstones to form. If it's not cold, we can never get the ice that forms those hailstones. But also it's got to be lifted up into the sky. And it's almost like if you were to take a washing machine, and don't do this at home, do not do this. But if you were to take a washing machine and throw in some clothes and some rocks and some other things and just kind of tumble it all together, it would just be this big chaotic mess. And that's kind of how I think about a big thunderstorm cloud, because there's a lot of air pushing these, going up into the sky and swirling around and kind of messing around with these hailstones and circling them all together until they become really big. Yesterday, I showed you a map of the United States, and it was where we were. I'll point out where we're at here on this map. We're right here. I'll color it in. That's us in Northwest Ohio. And I showed you a picture out in the middle of the country where I said Tornado Alley is, and it was something like this. It was like where most of those tornadoes were at. Well, this is a map of where all the big hailstones happen. It's called Hail Alley. So again, we're right here, so we're not in that at all. But out in Colorado and definitely in Kansas, that's where they get those really, really big hailstones. And the reason that they get it and we don't is because they get, the elevation out there is a little bit higher. They get these powerful thunderstorms, their elevation's higher. And so you don't have to go as far into the sky to get to that cold air that they need to turn all this into ice and to turn it into hail. The other thing I want to talk about today is wind and its significance around here. But when it comes to wind, it can do a lot of damage. And I'm going to talk more about safety tomorrow, but I want to point out this picture. What would happen if you were inside this house right here and this tree fell? It'd probably be scary, right? But the house itself actually protected everybody that was in it. We always talk about don't go and look out windows, because if tree branches or something like that hits it, it can break the glass and then it can hurt you, and we don't want that at all. But you can see in this situation, if you're looking out the window, that may have been bad with this tree coming down, but the house itself, I mean, that was its protection. The house did what it needed to do, and it ended up protecting the people in it. But yeah, we'll talk more about that weather safety for tomorrow. But I did want to show you a little bit more about how strong winds ended up coming and developing and why we get that. And this is kind of a picture of a thunderstorm cloud. And I've got a really cool graphic to show everybody here coming up that shows us even better. But basically the wind kind of starts in the same part of the cloud where a tornado does, but instead of it circulating and going around in a big circle, it starts there and it begins to move to the ground. And when it hits the ground, it ends up spreading out. And that's what does all the damage, is when it hits the ground and the wind has to spread out. So I'll show a really cool graphic on that here in just a second. But I did want to show something else here too, that this is another map, and I'm going to circle in where we are. I showed you Tornado Alley, right? I showed you where Hail Alley is, and this is where we are on this map. So Tornado Alley is out here. Hail Alley is back here. But look where Wind Alley is. This is called a derecho alley, so it's just another fancy term for strong winds. But this is the zone right here where it's at. And we're right on the edge of it. This is Northwest Ohio. So while we don't get a whole lot of tornadoes and we don't get a whole lot of those really, really big hailstones, we do get a lot of straight line wind. We do get a lot of damaging winds from thunderstorms that they don't get as much out in Tornado Alley or out in Hail Alley. So there's different kinds of severe weather that happens in different parts of the country. And for us, we usually get more wind than we get anything else. And this a lot of times happens back in June and even early July when we get these big lines of thunderstorms that come in. And it can knock trees down and sometimes knocks power out. It's not really a whole lot of fun to see that happen, but that's something that we typically deal with a little bit more than, I say, the rest of the country. So that's a look at where that's at. I want to show you some really neat graphics on how this all comes together, though. We'll start with the wind. So here's that thunderstorm cloud, and usually there's some dry air that's in that storm cloud, and that's important because if it's dry air, it ends up, when the ice begins to form, it actually can form a little bit quicker, and it can freeze a little bit faster. But then when everybody knows, have you ever been out in a rainstorm or felt the rain come in and notice how it's a little cooler after that rain comes in? Well, the same thing is happening when it rains in the top part of a cloud, but that cool air as it comes down, cold air is a little bit more dense, it's heavier, and so it comes down, it gets weighted down to the ground, and it comes, once it starts to happen, it goes faster and faster and faster, and those winds end up smacking the ground. Look at those trees, they just topple right over, and that's how we get our straight line winds, is when it hits the ground like that. And winds sometimes can be more powerful than tornadoes. Remember yesterday we talked about the EF0, the EF1 tornadoes? Those are weaker tornadoes overall, and they happen more often than any other type of tornado. Well, sometimes these strong winds that develop can actually be a little bit stronger than that. It might be 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. This graphic says up to 150 miles per hour. That's usually really, really rare to get it between 100 and 150 miles per hour, but sometimes it happens that way for really small areas, but it can do a lot of damage also. Hail is a really kind of a neat thing. So we're going back into our virtual cloud here where all these hailstones are at. Remember I talked about the washing machines, like tumbling it up, like throw a bunch of rocks in there, and you got water in there and clothes. Again, don't do that at home, but that would just be a loud, chaotic mess if that were to happen. And it's kind of like what's going on inside of our thunderstorm cloud, where you get these little hailstones and they go up, they start to freeze. And here's the crazy thing about the top part of a cloud on a hot summer day. When you get up to the top part of that cloud, we have ice crystals, so little pieces of snow. So somebody was asking me about snow and hail and if it has anything to do with one another. It does, because there's little snow and ice crystals in the top part of that cloud. And there's super cooled water droplets, and then it's just swirling all together. It's just a mess. The winds are going up, they're going down, they're going to the side, right, left, everywhere. And as it happens, these little hailstones, they start to freeze, and they're getting moved all over the place in that cloud. And those little cold water droplets are hitting it, and they're freezing. And it comes down a little bit, it goes up. And on the side of the screen, we've got our little layered of ice, our little circle ice hailstone that just kind of keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually, it gets so heavy that the winds can't keep it up in that cloud anymore, and it falls right out of the cloud. In that video we happened, it was kind of getting tossed out of the side of the cloud. They thought they were away from it, but they were still pretty close to where the hail was coming down. It was just kind of tossing out of the side, and those hailstones got really, really big. So that was a pretty neat thing that happens. But for us, usually when we do get hail, it's usually pretty small. It's usually towards the bottom part of the scale here. So we've got pea-size hail, marble-size hail, dime-size hail. This is pretty much right in here. This is usually kind of what we're looking at for hailstones and how big they get for us. But as you start to get bigger, in that video, we were seeing hail like this right here, this big softball-sized hail. This is a grapefruit. Sometimes that happens too, where it can get that big, which is really, really impressive to get hailstones that big. But anything that's about the size of a quarter or so, that's when a severe thunderstorm warning is going to come out. And we're going to go on TV and probably say, hey, this is part of the storm. You probably don't want to be outside because of the hail coming down. That gets real severe. So that's a lot of what we're talking about today when it comes to hail and wind. I want to leave a lot of the time up to you guys, though, for any questions, again, that you have, whether it be about hail, whether it be about wind, the hail sizes, or even if it's tornadoes or something else severe weather-wise, really anything else weather-wise that we can get to. And we'll go through some of those questions and answer those the best we can here. So go ahead and ask some of those questions here, and let's see what we've got so far. how big is the biggest hailstone on record? So really big, and it happened in the United States. There are two hailstorms that are really at the top of the list. For the longest time, it was in Coffeyville, Kansas, was the largest hailstone. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but it was very, very large. The one that beat that was about the size of a bowling ball. And this was up in Nebraska somewhere. Pretty sure it was northern Nebraska, not South Dakota. But anyway, it's a little bit farther north in the plains there. And yeah, it wasn't as heavy as a bowling ball, but it was almost the size of a bowling ball when it came down and went right through a porch. Can you imagine that? Not just coming down and hitting and cracking a window or something like that, but it went through a porch. They had to get it out. Pretty impressive stuff. The biggest hail size that Ohio's ever had, that's a good question. I don't know that off the top of my head. I may actually have a book in the back that's got it, but I don't want to delay too much time on that question. But the largest hail size around here that I've seen is golf ball size. That's really impressive for Ohio and Indiana and Michigan. So hail sizes usually we don't have that escalate too high in this part of the country. One of the reasons why is there's two reasons why. One, our elevation's much lower, which means you usually have to go farther and farther and farther up into the sky before you get to where it's cold enough for all that to freeze, for all the water droplets to freeze. The other is that usually it's so humid here that when those water droplets are freezing to those ice crystals, it takes a little bit longer to freeze. So cold, dry air is going to freeze much faster, if that makes sense, than really humid cold air. So there is a difference there because sometimes it'll actually trap little air pockets inside of it, and that's sometimes how you can get those really weird-looking hailstones that start to really grow quite a bit. Could hail break rocks? Yeah, it could. I mean, if it got big enough, it just depends. I mean, they're coming down. These hailstones are coming down really fast at about 100 miles per hour. So they are as high as 120 miles per hour. So they are really falling to the ground really quick. How long does it take for hail to melt? It depends how warm it is and how much falls. One of the most impressive hailstorms that I can remember was when I was growing up. I was still a kid. At that point I was in high school, I believe, but this was 1999. So we're going back a little more than 20 years ago. It was in April. I think it was April 10th. It was right around that point. So not too far from where we're at right now, just a couple weeks later in the year. So it wasn't all that warm yet. We did have really big hailstones that fell out of it. Nothing bigger than probably maybe the size of a nickel, dime size or nickel size hail. So it was, about like that. But it came down and it piled up so much, a couple inches deep in spots, that it took a long time for that to melt, especially after it was done raining because it was kind of cold after the storm went through. So there have been some really, really impressive video, and I'm sure YouTube has got this, and it happens out like in Hale Alley, like we were showing you, out in Kansas, out in Colorado, New Mexico. I've seen a lot of crazy video out there. Sometimes they get these hailstorms that don't move very much, and it just puts down tons of hail. And in some cases, it is maybe a foot deep, and they have to get out snow plows just to get it off the roads. It's almost like a massive winter storm until it all melts away, which is really, really crazy. Can hail be in outer space? Stacy was asking that. Hail can't be in outer space because we don't have the clouds and the storms to produce that hail in outer space. But if we could go to another planet, maybe, that was like Earth, that was producing storm clouds, it could be possible maybe on another planet somewhere. But to my knowledge, we don't know of any other planets yet that's like that, although it wouldn't surprise me if we find some somewhere that can produce storms like we have here and some hailstones. Has anyone ever died by being hit by hail? I would venture to say the answer to that is yes, but it's really rare for that to happen. Usually it hurts you. You want to try to get inside so you don't get hurt, but it usually doesn't kill people. Hail is terrible for crops and terrible for property damage and does a lot of damage. Have I ever been hit by one? I've been hit by hail, just nothing like the size that guy was showing. It was smaller and I got inside after getting hit. How long do hailstorms last? They can last, they can last a long time. Just like usually hailstorms will last longer than a tornado will. Because there's a larger area in the storm where there's hail falling down to the ground, and On top of that, if they're not moving real quick, I mean, it can start to pile up. So hail's a lot more common than tornadoes are. And usually here in Ohio, we get about 1 to 2 days a year to where we have hail falling from that storm. Are there hailstorms in winter? So that's a great question. Jessica was asking that, are there hailstorms in winter? So this happens, this is rare, but there have been, that it happens a little more often than, say, getting a tornado or getting some other type of spring weather to kind of interfere with winter weather. So what happens more often than actually, well, we can get hail, let's see. Yeah, can we get hail in winter? Definitely if we've got the ingredients there ready to go, we can get hail in the winter season. But sometimes we can get a storm system that comes in that's producing snow and even some sleet. And I've heard reports of hail falling in sleet storms. So sometimes these things can almost kind of mix together somewhat. There's also a really neat weather term. Both myself and Jay love it quite a bit. It's called graupel. It's called essentially soft hail. So it's kind of a combination in a sense. It's got characteristics of both hail and also sleet. It's almost an in-between type of precipitation, which is pretty neat. Let's see here. All right, some of the other questions. Smallest hail on record, we get about the size of a raindrop is about the smallest that you can get. So a lot of times we get what we say pea-size hail. That happens pretty often. That's the majority of the hail that we get here in Ohio is usually that smaller variety. Are there a lot of wind turbines in Wind Alley? Yeah, and I mean, we're starting to see more here with some of the wind that we've got. Everything's really flat. Usually you see the wind turbines more, not where you get the severe winds, but where it's just on a regular basis, it's just consistently windy. So if you go out to Minnesota, which is still in that wind alley that I was talking about, Iowa is in the middle of that too, but they've also get a lot more wind in general. There is wind turbines everywhere. Same down towards Texas and the Great Plains, they've got a lot out there. There's a lot of land, it's very flat, and it's quite windy, so absolutely. Let's see. Are there hailstorms in summer? Absolutely. Yeah, we probably get more hailstorms in summer than we do in spring, or at least it's close anyways. I would say that there's probably a little bit more though yeah, it'd be really close. But yeah, there's a lot in early summer and then late spring. That's kind of our peak time for it. Can hail bust through houses? So this is another great thing about having our house as a shelter is that it does a great job of protecting us, but hail can break through windows. So that is kind of the bigger concern is not only can tree branches break through windows and you could get hurt that way, but hail could also break those windows. Kind of like that video we were showing where the glass was just shattering and breaking apart. And that was some thick glass on the windshield that they were driving, but it was certainly big enough to where it was doing some damage with that. Let's see. Can hail be bigger than the size of a grapefruit? It can. It's really rare for that to happen, Kim, but it definitely can. Like the world record size hail is almost the size of a bowling ball. Doesn't weigh that much as a bowling ball, but it's about the size of a bowling ball. Hard to imagine that being actually coming down and causing that type of damage. Let's see here. Is a hail tornado a thing? So we talk about, when it comes to tornadoes, we talk about rain-wrapped tornadoes a lot of the time. Sometimes what happens is that a tornado can start not only wrap in sheets of rain, but it can wrap in sheets of hail, basically kind of a rain-hail mix along with it. So sometimes we see that happen, which makes it really tough to see the tornado. That's really the biggest problem when it comes to that. Maria's got a really good question here. Can hail fall during hurricanes? And I'm going to talk about hurricanes at a later point, but hurricanes are fascinating in that we think of them as this big, massive, powerful storm, and they are, but they're not like the typical storms that we see here. They develop in a totally different way. So here, yesterday we talked about that magical ingredient to turn a normal storm into a severe storm that can give us a tornado and hail and wind. But when it comes to hurricanes, if they get that magical ingredient, it's those strong winds aloft, it will rip a hurricane apart. It will shred it to pieces. And so hurricanes don't operate the same way at all. They want the warm ocean water, and they don't want anybody around them. You know, right now we're doing a bunch of the social distancing ourselves, and we're trying to kind of get away from people a little bit. Well, that's kind of like hurricanes. They don't want anybody around them. They don't want any other weather around them at all. They want the sunshine. They want to be by themselves, and then they grow bigger and bigger and bigger and become more and more powerful. But as soon as they get on land, or as soon as they get strong winds aloft, it rips them apart and they're done. So because of that, because those same ingredients that produce hail actually rip apart a hurricane, you usually don't get hail in a hurricane. If you do, it would just be a couple thunderstorms that develop on the initial outer feeder bands that are not close to the strong winds of that hurricane itself. That's a really good question. Let's see. Can I eat hail? You can. It's just good. It's like an ice cube, but you probably want to make sure there's no dirt in it or anything like that. But yeah, it's just ice. That's all it is. Can a tornado pick up stones and throw them? Yeah, a tornado definitely can. And there's no doubt about that. All right, let me see if I can. I don't know if there's any questions here that I missed. Can hail go through the ground? Hail won't necessarily go. The ground eventually is going to stop it, but it can put if it's like soft ground, kind of like mud or something like that. It can definitely kind of put a print into the ground. I'm not sure on that video if we saw any of that, but you saw a field kind of scattered with hail, but you would see that. And one thing that happens when we get the big corn crops, like in June, and June's a big month for the storms that at least get some small hail. Even if you get pea-sized hail, and again, those hailstones are coming down at like 100 miles per hour, it just rips right through a lot of those crops and causes a lot of damage. But you can see a lot of holes like in the corn leaves and stuff like that sometimes when that happens. Let's see. Is hail made out of carbon dioxide? So hail is just water, so it's H2O, but it's freezing. So it starts off as a little itty bitty tiny piece of ice, and then you get more water kind of around it in a ring, and then it freezes, and then it just kind of accumulates these little layers of ice. And how can we humans form hail? It'd be tough. That's tough to do. To at least make it look like it would in nature. I mean, for us, I mean, also, you know, if we're just taking water and putting it in the freezer, we're going to get ice, and we could form it into probably however we want. But that'd be tough because nature is swirling it around so much, kind of in this water and ice blender almost, that it's kind of real chaotic. By the way, we're going to talk about lightning tomorrow. Lightning is one of my favorite weather topics, and we'll talk all about it and all the science about it and why it happens and the electricity and all that. But the reason we're talking about hail today is because it has a lot to do with the same ingredients that help produce lightning. Even when we don't get hail, that same chaotic atmosphere that's in the top part of a storm, that's got ice crystals and water crystals and winds that are going all over the place, it doesn't just create hail, it also creates that charge in the thunderstorm itself that can produce some lightning. Can hail break through an umbrella? It definitely can. Is there such thing as a Sharknado? Nope, just in the movies. Just in the movies. Could you say my name? Jonah. Yep, there we go. Yeah, Tiffany says, can you say my name? It's Jonah. So, hello, Jonah. Let's see, what else? Jen says, thanks for doing this. You're welcome. Yeah, no problem. Hopefully everybody's liking some of these lessons, and you know, I'm excited about the one tomorrow talking about lightning, and the weeks ahead we'll talk about some earth science stuff and some space weather stuff too. So really excited about that. Let's see, does anybody else have any other questions? If so, we'll get to those real quick and before signing off here. Anything about severe weather, tornadoes, hail? What was the most severe tornado to hit Ohio? We were talking a little bit about this yesterday, but the Xenia tornado is probably the top one that happened during the super outbreak in 1974. But Toledo's biggest one was in the Palm Sunday outbreak in 1965, and that was a strong F4 that back in the day there was debate on whether that should have been an F5 also. So that was a devastating and a powerful tornado that hit at that point. Let's see here. Jennifer says, what time does this start? So each day we're going to do this at 11 a.m. Right here on the 13 ABC Facebook page. And then what makes a tornado stop? Courtney was asking. So once we get the ingredients that help form that tornado, so all those ingredients are in place. Once those aren't there anymore, the tornado basically falls apart. And a lot of times it goes through this process where it starts off as a small, thin tornado. It gets a little bit bigger, and then the last phase is what we call it roping out. It almost looks like a little tiny, swiggly, weak rope before it finally comes to an end. So Diana was asking, does the sky often turn different colors during severe storms, and if so, why? Yeah, it absolutely does, and it definitely does with hail, because a lot of times what happens is that, well, let's just start with a normal storm. When we've got the blue and the dark clouds, kind of like on this graphic that's up right now, it says questions. Behind it, it's kind of that gray, almost a greenish tint to it, but definitely some blues in there. And that happens because the water droplets that are in that cloud, when it interacts with the sunlight, it kind of shifts the color spectrum that we see. And so we see that color, but it shifts even more when hail's involved, because it's a different type of, it's a much larger, and it changes everything. And that's how we see that shift clear over to green. So green, usually when you see a storm, that means that there's hail somewhere in that thunderstorm. It may not be real big, but somewhere in that storm, there's usually some hail growing quite a bit. And can hail fall during a blizzard? Nate was asking. It's not impossible, but definitely it is it's really tough to do, because those ingredients that form a blizzard and then form hail do not kind of cross over very often at all. So, all right. So I think we'll go ahead and sign off for today. Well, we'll get to Todd. So Garrett asking, can hail destroy a bridge? Usually it's not going to destroy to the point to where it topples the whole bridge over, but you might see some dings in the paint or something like that on that bridge. Bridges, usually they're built really strong to carry cars and that type of thing. So usually hail will leave them alone, or at least they'll just kind of maybe ding up the paint or something like that that's on the bridge. So anyways, guys, once again, thanks for joining me today, and I'm excited about talking about lightning. Tomorrow I'm going to show some different lightning pictures, and why some of it is just flashes in the sky, and why some of it crawls out and kind of looks like a big spider web and covers the whole sky, and what causes it, and how to stay safe from it, and how hot it is. So there's a lot of kind of neat stuff to talk about at that, and also severe weather safety. So hope you guys are enjoying it. We'll see you guys tomorrow.